almost feel like Gordon Bombay would have taken his career to even further heights.
Everything's flashy, everything's cocaine, everything's fun.
Open wide for some soccer!
I don't care what you think about what your personal thoughts are at home. I care that you hate the Cowboys.
Call this college rule!
Welcome, everybody, to the Sports Experience Podcast. I'm Chris. This is Dom. We're a couple of comics that always record right here in Angle Studio, right downtown in Tucson. And we're not in a block. We're not here doing anything. We're here to rock with possibly the baseball player that inspired the Bugs Bunny baseball team that you see in the cartoons. We're talking about Hack Wilson today.
Hack Wilson, everybody.
A man's face that when you look at him, you think, oh, something is wrong with him. And it was.
There was plenty wrong. Not his fault, though.
No.
Not his fault. This guy was born... You know how they talk about people being born on third base who have very successful starts to their lives? This guy was born basically in the Veterans Stadium jail.
Oh, my God.
But he rose to stardom and had probably like one of the best quick runs of a player in National League history.
Well, when we talk about the dead ball era and when home runs started to become like a thing, he is the guy that kind of gets left out of the conversation when you talk about like Babe Ruth and you're like, oh, no. He hit 30 plus for like 7 years consecutive and then sometimes hit 50 and you were just like, oh, yeah.
So let's dive right in. Hack Wilson, Lewis Robert Wilson.
I really thought his real name was Hack.
That would have been great.
I'm just being honest because of the era, and there's a couple of names throughout this I had to write down because his wife has the greatest name ever.
She does. But you could pass now for Hack. You could write Hack down and be like, that's the least weird name we've heard today.
You're not wrong.
Born April 26, 1900 in Elwood City, Pennsylvania, 30 miles northwest of Pittsburgh. And, he didn't have a very nice situation growing up as far as his parents and his upbringing, essentially.
His mom was a bit of a drifter. She was 16.
Which is too old for Karl Malone. 16 is too old. Like, you need to not be able to get into a PG-13 movie if you want to get with Karl Malone.
You come in, Karl Malone sees you're that old, he just goes, the pussy has spoiled.
Go home, Grandma. I don't make deliveries.
The pussy has spoiled. But when you hear about it, both of his parents were extremely heavy drinkers. His mom was like in this era of right before 1900 to 10 or whenever she died.
1907.
07. Yeah. It's this era of like hobos riding the rails, and that's kind of what they said. That's what her lifestyle kind of was.
Your bindle meets my bindle. Let's get together.
Yes, exactly. Meets his dad in a steel town.
His dad was a steel worker.
I was just going to say, are we going to sing some Journey?
I think we might. Just a small town girl living on those lonely rails. Took the midnight train meeting going. Robert Wilson.
Anywhere. God, that's romantic now that I think. I didn't think it was romantic when I was writing this down. Now, with Journey behind it.
There's 12 steps on that journey, Chris.
Oh, God.
So his dad was also an alcoholic.
Yes.
And after his mom died, he just abandons him after the funeral.
Yes.
He legit abandons him.
Babe Ruth style.
We're talking not even going to live with your grandma in Waterbury.
No, like
her opening the door with a Gene Simmons mask on.
Like literally dropping him off in the street kind of thing where you're just like, well, you got to fend for yourself now. And I'm not saying that's how you make a power hitter. I'm just saying that's one of the things.
I mean, if we're going top 3 reasons, that's at least number 3.
Yes.
That's at
not
least
one,
number
not
3.
2, but
abandoning it's like, what's his name in There'll Be Blood? I've abandoned my child.
Yep.
Watch him hit 40 dingers in a season at Wrigley Field.
That was really good.
Oh, dude, that's like
impression.
That's one of the few voices
I didn't see that one coming.
I used to mess with Andrew all the time. I'd be like, I have a milkshake, you see, and here is a straw that leads all the way to the center field ivy, and I drink it up.
The Daniel Day-Lewis just out of nowhere. I love it.
All right. Anyway, he's abandoned. He moves into a boarding house and ends up... eventually, his dad comes back.
Yeah, I imagine this is kind of like the life of heavy drinker where he kind of goes out and he's like, I'm going to sober up and get my boy. Yeah. And then he kind of comes back and
just another round. Oh, man, I left my kid there.
Yep.
Oh, no.
Oh,
At least he didn't leave him in a hot car. He just left him in a boarding house.
It's true.
So he takes his son basically to the outside of Philly, essentially in an industrial town, so he can work. And Hack also learned to throw rocks at trains on Christmas, which is a Philly tradition.
I thought about that too.
At 16, though, he ends up quitting school.
Yeah, so
they're outside of Eddystone.
I'm not trying to be a dick with this. I can't imagine he was a great student. There's a couple of things we're about to talk about.
Yes, we are, which are not. We're not making fun of it. Like,
no.
This is legitimately tragic and not his fault and leads to a lot of things that he gets into trouble with later.
Yes.
I mean, if he was here around now, that would probably be a very different narrative about his life.
Yes.
So
16, he leaves school. He goes and works at a locomotive factory. And this is when he kind of like gets into this adult body.
Yeah.
Which they describe he's 5'6", about 200 pounds. And he's built like a keg, essentially.
Yeah.
Like, you know how, like I said earlier in the episode, he looked like the Looney Tunes kind of cartoon? It's because he also had really small feet.
Very small hands,
and
smell like cabbage.
Giant, flat shovel face is what they kind of would say. And all of those are symptoms of fetal alcohol syndrome, which they didn't really get at the time. They were just like, doesn't this guy look kind of weird? Doesn't he look like kind of like a keg?
He kind of belongs in a carnival.
Yes. But that was the thing, was he was such a great small power hitter for the time.
Well, I mean, leverage. And you're the one generating all the power, Chris.
I was just going to say
that bat speed.
Well, a lot of people think it's power. It's speed. Speed's
the name of the game.
Name of the game.
Don't have to have, big Shaq-size shoes, everybody.
But also he has a smaller strike zone because he's 5'6".
How do you even pitch to this person? It's like if you put Babe Ruth in a trash compactor.
Yes, it really is.
Righty. But yeah,
because he is like all muscle. He's,
I just wanted to say there's this great quote by Shirley Povich.
I was going to say it.
An American hero for sports writing. His son is an American hero for finding out whose people's fathers are. He said he was built along the lines of a beer keg and was not wholly unfamiliar with its contents.
So you see, this is going to creep into his game later, that he was a huge drinker, huge partier, and he was an MLB player in the Prohibition era.
Yes,
which
he
is
was.
such a weird thing to think about.
Landis is in charge too, and we know about his shenanigans.
Shenanigans. That is the fairest commissioner we've ever seen in baseball.
The absolute fairest.
You want me to tear up my notes?
So
but this is what we mean. Rough upbringing. Parents abandoned him and died, and it's like and he has this disease that isn't quantified at that time. So he has all of these things that essentially, like you were saying, is stacked against him. But he moves to, where'd he go? Martinburg.
Yeah, I did want to add one thing to the fetal alcohol syndrome, because this kind of comes into play. It's not just physical, it's mental.
Yes, it is.
Personality. It said it led to delayed development, learning disorders, and a short attention span, along with poor impulse control.
I think, and people said this a lot about him, because obviously, like, some of those are going to be worse than others. They were like, oh, his impulse control when he drank was really bad. And that's something.
Could you imagine if he did stand-up? He'd have been perfect.
Oh, my God. He would have been we would have called him Hack.
We would have called him Hack for a lot of different reasons.
That's right.
By 1921, like you said, Martinsburg, West Virginia. At that point, he's playing lots of baseball in the sandlots. Talked about how he got so strong working as a printer's devil, lifting millions of pounds of lead. There were no such thing as child labor laws.
Nope. And to his credit, like I saw this thing where he was talking about, they were just like, yeah, there was sandlot baseball everywhere. So I used to play all of the time. And he goes to Martinsburg and joins the Martinsburg Mountaineers.
Yep.
But he's playing catcher at this time, and that's one of the things. So he's a Mike Piazza. He's a power hitting catcher. He's a
he's Johnny half of a bench.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. But his first game, he breaks his leg.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and it's one of the things that you don't see anymore, but it kind of makes sense where the plays at the plate, you're like, oh, the catcher is fodder in this. They're literally just standing there like, fuck.
He's like an incredible crash dummy.
Yeah.
Because there were no Buster Posies at the time. They're
No.
just barreling in.
Yeah.
It's also this year, after moving from catcher to center field to the outfield, he meets his lady there in Martinsburg.
Yes.
What's her name, Chris?
Virginia Riddleberger.
Yep.
And it is such a great name that you're like, oh, don't take Wilson.
Yeah, no.
Be a Riddleberger for the rest of your life, because just to be clear as to how they name people back in the day, they would name them almost as what you did. So this woman's grandfather was making burgers, and they didn't understand what was in the burger. So they're like, you mean Riddleberger? Is that who you're talking about? It's like, fucking A, brother.
What's his name from Batman? That sounds like something McDonald's would run during a Batman. I just see Jim Carrey from that damn movie like, enjoy our new Riddleberger.
You don't know what's in it.
It could be horse meat. You don't know.
Met her in 22, married in 23.
Much older than Hack as well.
Yes.
Yeah,
And it kind of comes back to bite him in the ass. But this is going to sound kind of fucked up. With his mental faculties, it kind of makes sense that an older woman would kind of swoop in.
Oh, easy.
And they would find that connection of almost her like taking care of him and him kind of.
Chicks dig the long box.
Dude.
Here's my meal ticket.
That's right.
So that first year, it's 364, 35 dingers. They didn't calculate OPS, but apparently it was over 1,000.
I was going to say, because he really tore up these, what would be considered minor leagues.
The next year, he's making $500 for the Portsmouth Truckers.
Yep.
I believe they changed their name recently to the Lot Lizards.
Ooh.
I want you boys to break me open like a coconut.
I'm going to go take you to this motel, and you're going to make me into some Swiss cheese.
They love their truckers there in Portsmouth.
It's true.
Has an incredible season for them. And he was essentially one of his teammates, like we talked about with Tim Brown. One of his teammates was getting scouted by the New York Giants.
Yep.
And John McGraw said, you know what? You're throwing for us. We'll take you on. We need some outfielders. And yeah.
Well, he hit 388. And it
Exactly.
makes me think of like what the scouts were looking at when they would show up and like not look at batting percentage, because they literally were like scouting somebody else in his team, and then they showed up and they were like, oh yeah, we're gonna buy this guy's contract.
Do you think if they had walk-up music now, like at an opposing stadium, someone would have played and he just parks one like 450 to center field and flips them off? But the 20s were not a nice time.
You're not wrong, because
20s were not a nice time.
we'll
Chris.
get into later where he has some altercations with some fans.
He does.
Where it's a different. It's Malice in the Palace almost every weekend. That's
It
all
really
I'm saying.
is. Like, remember how shocked people were by Malice? I'm sure if Malice in the Palace, if you showed that to somebody born in like 1880, they'd be like, oh, that's a Saturday.
Yeah.
That's a Saturday. I don't know what all these black people are doing running around, but it's a Saturday.
It's a Saturday.
So he was referred to as a loud vulgarian draped in a $17.95 suit. And on September 29th, 1923, overcoming so many unbelievable odds.
Yeah.
I need to keep stressing this. So many.
Yes.
Makes his debut in Major League Baseball with the New York Giants.
I was gonna say, I know we make jokes or whatever but like what he did was truly amazing with his childhood, and on top of that, having fetal alcohol syndrome, where you're just like, God, that keep going, man.
Like, seriously, 1924, he's starting to get some at bats. He's got 383 at bats that year. He hits 295 with 10 dingers and 20 doubles.
And he becomes like their first or pretty much
their fourth outfielder.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I was going to say, because it really is like a not outfield by committee, but he really is that fourth guy that rotates in to almost all the outfields. I saw that where he plays left, right, and center.
Mm-hmm. In July that year, he sprains his ankles, has to be basically carried off the field. So he's dealing with an ankle issue all season. Luckily for him and the Giants, they make the World Series that year in 24.
NL pennant, but they end up losing to the Senators of Washington. And
not even a team anymore.
I was going to say, yeah, there's, a couple of that. But did you get into his nickname at this point? Because this is when
let's talk about it. Yeah.
This is when his nickname starts to, like, when he becomes a Giant, there's a couple of different stories, which I kind of love from this era, where they're like, we don't 100% know.
It was a mystery.
It was a mystery.
It was a mystery. Like a riddle burger.
Oh, my God. Like a riddle burger.
The basis of his nickname's quite the riddle burger.
What am I eating? A riddle burger.
Mr. Wayne. All right, so one of the theories was he looked like wrestler George Hackenschmidt.
Which that was the other name that I wanted to bring up, because they literally took Hackenschmidt and just took it to Hack.
Yeah.
And they said his friends kind of did that, where they kind of were like, oh, yeah, that guy's got the same thing you got, bud.
Yeah. Oh, God.
But
you know what? You can't say Hackenschmidt during these times because we just won the war.
That's true.
Those Germans, you can't be rolling
That's
around.
true.
You can't be like, look at old Hackenschmidt in center field.
You're shortening that in the Ellis Island way
exactly
to Hack. The other one I feel like is more likely.
I agree,
because of the way sports is, the way sports writers are, just like the way they not make fun of people, but like really point out something that you're like, oh, God damn, do I look like that?
But you know, it's not like players dislike them for that.
No
history of animosity either way.
They've never hated sports writers. Baseball players and sports writers are besto friends.
Yes, they are.
So there was a sports writer that came out and said that he kind of looked like a taxi, and in that era, taxis were referred to as hacks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he did have a cab-like physique.
He looked like a taxi cab.
Yeah.
I mean, put a bat on a taxi cab? Hello there.
Well, I think the more accurate thing is a beer keg.
Yeah, the beer keg is,
That's where you're like, oh, because he literally is that barrel-chested.
But he was so ripped.
Yes, that's what I mean.
So ripped.
He was all
carrying
muscle.
all that lead.
Yes.
You don't need a home gym. You just need to do really dangerous industrial work when you're a tween.
You're talking about his cock, right?
Oh, of course.
Dude, he's carrying so much lead.
A lot more lead than Shaq is. So
we don't know. That's the point.
We're only speculating.
Until we know.
We have to know one day. 1925, only has 180 at bats. This year he does have the longest home run in Ebbets Field history.
Yep.
So,
but they are bringing him up kind of slow, like you see in this thing of probably bites the Giants in the ass. But
he had issues hitting breaking pitches.
Yeah,
like Serrano. So that was really dragging him down.
He said, "Fuck you, Joe Boo."
Hats for bats, man. That's all he needed. He just
do this myself.
Should have gone to the local golf club and said, "Hey, I'm going to take a few of these.
If
you don't play golf, don't worry about it."
Don't worry about it.
So, he was sent down to the AA Toledo Mud Hens. I don't know if Lou Brown was managing in the 20s, though.
No, he was still selling white walls.
That's true, yeah. I'll talk to you later.
Got a guy on the other end for some white walls.
But it was a very disappointing season.
Yeah.
I couldn't really research too much into it, or like there wasn't a lot of info. I'm thinking the Giants are kind of getting to know him a little bit better, and he might have some erratic behavior going on, and they got some other players down the pipe like Mel Ott ready to step into the outfield.
Who's not a raging alcoholic. I thought that too, where you see McGraw come out, who's the manager of the Giants, and said that we pushed him to the majors too quickly. And because sometimes you have to like read between what they're actually saying. And what I thought he was saying was he got too famous, whatever, too quickly. So he was like young and just can't turn the partying off.
Yeah.
And that's going to look really bad once that explodes. So they literally send him down to the minors. And in the thing that I read, they were like, purposefully or not, they did not protect him as a player.
Well, they probably thought nobody wanted him because you really don't have much of a window into what he did.
No, not in this era, especially.
Ross Young's a Giants outfielder, though, said they let go of the best outfielder I ever played alongside, and they're going to regret it.
Yep.
The Cubs take a $5,000 flyer on him after the year and signs.
Pick him up off waivers.
And to me, this is a perfect fit because the Cubs aren't like great.
They were last.
Yeah.
They were last in their division.
Which is typical Cubs fashion. But like still, he gets to go play in another city. He's not like in New York. Maybe you can turn the partying down, which he doesn't. But the expectations are so much lower, which for someone like him with the type of mental state that he has, it's just so he can come along and develop is actually probably pretty good.
Well, and this is the thing that I saw them say was when he gets to Chicago, he loves the nightlife of it. And
wouldn't?
And the Chicago fans love him, so he feels very appreciative of this thing. And the manager at the time just let him swing away. That was the big thing that I saw that I was like, oh, yeah, they just kind of were like, if you feel it, hit it.
Well,
and
his manager, Joe McCarthy, who would go on to later win a lot of World Series.
2 times.
That's still a lot.
2 times 4. No, I'm just kidding. But they said this is he was the reason that he kind of stayed in line and batted like he did for the Cubs, because you could see at the Giants and later with a different manager at the Cubs, it's his batting really declines like crazy.
Yeah, and it's just like, I guess one of the best quotes was because he never had curfews, he never sent out spies.
No, yeah.
He basically made them pay for it with wind sprints and basically puking.
So they knew what was going to be there the next morning for them waiting if they partied all night.
Yeah.
That kind of shit.
So it basically said, what could a manager say to such a loyal player who had a weakness he couldn't handle? So I won't say he treated him with kid gloves, but he definitely... It's managing people, not only managing ball players.
Yes.
Essentially.
Yeah, it really is. And then we see him have 4 of the best years almost of anybody.
This is some of the best NL Slugger seasons until you see guys start pumping themselves with stuff.
Whoa. We don't believe in that.
No.
They never did that.
That's true. That's a myth, Chris.
Thank
you.
you.
A myth.
And now what? We're buying into myths?
So in 1926, he becomes a fan favorite out of the gate. They love him in Chicago.
That's the thing. They were like, dude, we have fetal alcohol syndrome too.
We all do. City of broad shoulders, maybe flat faces. We don't know. So leads the NL in dingers that year. Hits 321. That year in May, he hit a home run off the scoreboard at Wrigley and was later arrested that night in a speakeasy trying to escape out of a window, which seeing size 5.5 shoes dangling out of a window.
I imagine this was my thought, that he went to jump out and he couldn't get out.
Yeah, I think that's too.
And everybody was like, dude, like, come on.
Oh, hack, why?
So good.
You can't contort yourself. He was fined $1 by his manager, which I like to see that. The next year, amazing again.
Led the league in home runs again with 30, 129 RBIs. This is the thing that I feel like from this era, you're like, oh, he was doing 100 RBIs every year, 30 home runs every year. And it's just not common for this era.
No, the team is improving. He's still struggling with his off the field kind of internal demons, but the Cubs are moving up in the standings. They finished 4th this year. 28 again, 37 dingers, leading the National League. 38 doubles though. That was what I found so incredible. Is that the extra base hits he could collect, over 300 again, 120 RBIs, another 3rd in the National League.
Are you saying that it's surprising he gets doubles with those tiny little feet?
No.
What are you saying? Look at those tiny little feet go. No, but they
would have played that circus music. I guarantee if they had access.
Sure. For sure.
Oh my God.
June 28th, playing the Cardinals, and a fan is heckling him.
Yes, he is.
He jumps into the little, because he was like in one of those front boxes, and just starts wailing on him, which then turns all of the Cardinal fans into like, they were like, it was near riot, where you had like thousands of people coming onto the field, and we had to escort him out.
Oh God.
And he was just looking to fight everybody.
Oh no!
The fan ended up suing him for $20,000 and losing.
Yes, he did.
Which puts faith back into that American justice system. That's
really
all I have to
does.
say.
They were like frivolous lawsuits.
They were like,
this is the best rivalry in the National League, probably outside of Dodgers Giants.
Yep.
You deal with those consequences.
He was in his right to beat the shit out of you, sir. Yeah, it was great.
Oh man. Oh, he gets into some more dust ups though.
This is the era, so it's like 28 to like 31, 32, where they're talking about they're just like he was pretty much out of control. But I feel like because of the way baseball was, where it's like you would get a couple of articles, but like he had to have done 2 or 3 times as much shit as this.
It's what they didn't report.
Yep.
That he did. There was a great story. They were at Wrigley Field, and the commissioner was there, Landis, and he saw Al Capone at the game because Hack was a huge fan of Al Capone, and going to speakeasies and having a good, sensible night on the town with the rest of the gentlemen.
It's true.
And Landis called him over and he said, "Why are you talking to thugs?" And Hack was taken aback. He said, "Well, Judge, I go over to his place, so why shouldn't he come over to mine?"
It's so good.
I love it. I love it. Oh, Prohibition's going to end soon, though. It's going to end soon. It'll end.
One day.
1929 has maybe one of the best seasons ever, and it's not even his own best season. Hits 345, leads baseball in 39 dingers, 159 RBIs. And oh my God, in the second game of a July 4th doubleheader against the Reds, pitcher Ray Culp called him a bastard, which you don't do that just to a guy born out of wedlock with a lot of scores to settle. That's not a nice thing to do. So he basically just went in there and kicked the shit.
Well, my favorite part of this entire story was the guy was talking shit from the dugout. Hack hits a single, gets on base safely, takes a timeout, sprints to the dugout, and starts beating the shit out of this guy before they can separate him. And you're like, oh, yeah, he was a baseball player. That was his first thing. He was just like, I'm getting on base, and then I'm coming right over to you and beating the shit out of you.
Then he beat up another pitcher like very shortly after on a railroad platform.
Yep.
Just good for you, Hack.
I was going to say late. I think it was later that day.
It was. It was that night.
That night. And this is what I mean by this is the stuff that was reported on. So this was reported on because they were in Cincinnati. It's not, you know what I mean?
If that happened in Chicago, it would have been Hack Wilson has tea with Reds pitcher.
Exactly. Al Capone makes Red pitcher disappear.
Allegedly, but doesn't file his taxes.
29, he signs a contract to box a football player.
I saw that.
But his wife actually talked him out of it with Wrigley trying to just convincing him. It was just like, this is fucking stupid.
Well, William Wrigley was a teetotaler, and he was probably the only person that wasn't a fan of him. But it's like, oh, you get me over 150 RBIs?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll find a spot for you. But they win. They win the NL pennant that year.
Yeah, they win the NL pennant, and they go to the World Series against the old Connie Mack and the A's.
Yeah, going up against that Simmons and Fox and Haas, that Lefty Grove is pitching. That's a pretty tall order,
especially for that era. He said that because later in his career he kind of goes through some shit, and he was just like, I always thought they were going to remember the 56 home runs, not the 2 drop fly balls in the World Series. And you're like, I'm sorry, dude, you can't pick what they.
Yeah, you don't get to pick and
remember.
You don't get to pick and choose there, fucking Marty Schottenheimer.
Yep.
But so they go to the World Series in Game 4, like you had described, in the bottom of the 7th. They're down 2-1, which, although you're down in the series, you're up 8-0 in the 4th game.
I was just going to say, it's 8-0, which you see the 2 fly ball drops. You're like, well, I mean, that happens. And then you're like, oh, that was like pivotal in this game.
Apparently he was inconsolable after that game. I think this probably, not that he was on a straight and narrow path, but this is going to just, especially somebody devastating.
Yeah.
He hit 471.
I was just going to say he almost hit 500 in the world. He almost hit every other ball or every other time he was up to bat. But he had these 2 drops. Both of them lost in the sun. One of them scored 2 runs. They ended up losing 10-8. Like
you're not.
It's
coming
so
back from
bad.
that.
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, that was the team that fucking like interrupted Murderers Row.
Yep.
So it's not like they were playing, a garbage fucking team. 1930 though. It's not only his best season up until the alleged era that we discussed previously.
Thank you.
Might have been the best one by a National League power hitter ever.
For sure. For sure.
Leads MLB with 208 hits, 356 average. Strikes out only 84 times this season. You know how many home runs he had, Chris?
This is his... This is his 56.
56.
191 RBIs. Technically, it was 190 when the season ended, and then they added another one. There was one of I forget if they were playing the Reds, but one of the baseball players
He hit another one out.
Yeah, and they were like in the bullpen, and they were like, it went out, but we weren't going to say anything. It like hit the stands or whatever and bounced back in, and they were like, oh, that hit the net, and they were like, yeah, that hit the net. So technically he had 57. He had 13 home runs in August.
Oh my god.
And 53 RBIs. So like, just to put it in perspective, as to 1 month, he was almost hitting
he was hitting a season's worth for someone.
I was gonna say he was almost hitting a home run every 3rd day.
Oh my god.
Every like 2.5, 2.75, whatever you want to say. It's crazy.
That record will never be broken, though, that 191 RBIs.
Nope.
That will never, that's not going to, for a single season, that won't be touched.
Nope. It's so far above what guys average now. It's crazy.
Lou Gehrig could hit like 170.
I think
maybe 1 year he had like 180. There is no way this is ever getting broken with the way baseball's played today.
Nope.
At all. Career highs in slugging and OPS. 1.177 OPS?
Mm-hmm.
You got to be shitting me. Unfortunately, they don't win the pennant this year.
No.
Which really could have come in handy. And after this season, this is kind of when we see it all collapse.
Well, you can't just...
people who leave.
Yeah, you can't just party forever and expect to keep it going. 31... They say he comes to training camp 20, 30 pounds overweight.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously heavily drinking, because there's like a certain way people look where you're like, that's like 10 pounds of just alcohol weight, like water weight. You know what I mean? So I imagine he was very, very bad coming into 31, which is crazy to think that 30 was like his season. Coming into 31, it's almost a different player.
I've never seen someone this good, as far as like reading about it, just have a drop off this massive. Like normally it like tails off over a course of seasons, due to age or diet or whatever. But this was almost immediate.
He went from first to worst on his team. I've never seen that. 30, he literally set records that will never be broken. 31, he was so bad that William Wrigley literally came out publicly and was like, we want to trade him.
Yeah.
Like, we don't give a shit.
We're open for business.
Yes. And they end up doing that.
Well, so 30.
Yeah, give me some 31 stats.
Well, I know. I'm not even talking about stats here. This is the year McCarthy's gone.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yes.
That was the big thing. He's replaced by player manager, someone we've done an episode on. Rogers Hornsby. And if you go listen to that episode, he's an asshole. Like that's the best way to. He's an asshole.
Well, he's not a players manager.
No,
he's definitely a management manager where he's like, get your shit together. And we see,
but he's mean.
And we see McCarthy was kind of protecting him. Coming back, you're like, oh, he has no protection. He's really declining in every aspect of his life.
He's basically only a situational pinch hitter by the end of the season.
Yep.
There's situations where he's being thrown out of games and being dragged off the field by his teammates. He's getting in fights, in train stations, and trying to fight, sports writers in train stations. He went from 191 RBIs to 60.
It's crazy.
That's unbelievable. After an MVP season, that's what he got. And it only gets worse because, like you said, December 11th, 1931, he's traded to the St. Louis Cardinals. Those teams never did business.
No.
I bet you they were like, just take him. We don't even give a shit. He can't play anymore.
And then he played for the Cardinals for a month and got traded to the Brooklyn Dodgers.
Yeah.
So you could see how bad it had to have been, so bad that they were like, get off of our team. And then for the Dodgers, he started okay. In 32, he had a in the park grand slam,
Which is awesome.
but after that, it was nothing. You know what I mean? Where I wonder if they were like, dude, you got to get sober. And he was like, I'll be sober for 2 months. And then it was like,
I'll be sober between the lines.
they released him mid-season 32. Phillies pick him up for another month. He goes 2 for 20, and then they just release him.
Yeah. That like between 33 and 34, he does almost nothing. Someone had made a really good quote that said he looked like a man trying to drag a trunk on his back in the outfield.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't even just his hitting that
No,
declined.
it was
him in the
everything.
field.
Yeah, it really was his physique, his physical shit really came to bite him. Where you see that like Babe Ruth thing where he gets fat and that, but he got like really bad.
Apparently with the Dodgers, they even told him, go and find a trade for yourself. Go and find it. Like we'll let you. We don't want you anymore. Like go and find it. And then they said the saddest part was nobody wanted him.
Nobody wanted him.
Nobody wanted him anymore. He in his last game, August 25th, 1934, he was a pinch hitter for the Phillies.
Yep.
That was it.
That was it. It's such a weird ending 4 years after one of the best seasons.
Yeah. Like one of the best seasons ever. Not just by like a team or like by an individual person.
Not just by a man with fetal alcohol syndrome.
Not by
Man with one hand. We're not talking about that.
No,
it was
we're not.
191, like you said, will never be touched.
No.
And 56 home runs probably should be the NL record. I'm just saying.
I mean, looking back,
we're not getting into that.
I think the only guy before that era who hit 50 in the NL was George Foster. And he did it one time.
Yep.
So he goes through the rest of the 30s, no direction. Absolutely no direction. Like, he has no real skills as far as school or anything else. This man was a ball player through and through. That's basically all he had. Worked odd jobs.
Opened a pool hall that
he
failed and kind of bankrupted probably the last of his baseball money.
41, he's in Baltimore. He's working at an aircraft assembly plant. Ends up getting fired. By 42, he's a bartender, and you're thinking, hey, this is just like Mayday Malone and Cheers.
Well, he's in Chicago as a bartender, and he's singing for tips.
Which is, oh, God.
And then it kind of gets out as to who he is. And this is what I brought up earlier, where he said he was just like, I always thought I would be remembered for that 1930 season where I had 56 home runs, 190 RBIs at the time. But literally, he said every single person would come up to me and be like, you remember when you dropped those 2 fly balls? And it was, that had to feed into his alcoholism so bad that...
Oh, man. I mean, that's almost like, don't you have to do something good to be remembered? Not if you do it colorfully.
Yeah, it's brutal.
It's brutal, but he was working in the city parks and rec department like a drunk Ron Swanson, essentially.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It was a sad end.
Yes.
It was a really sad end.
He ends up dying penniless, I think, in Baltimore in 48. Right?
November 23rd, 1948. Just before that, he went on the CBS radio show, We the People, and was like, look at me right now. I had it all and just completely screwed everything up.
There's 2 good interviews with him. One was he was talking about kids being super talented and getting into baseball, and he was just like, that's not, you have to have good management and good, like, determination. You know what I mean? Like
you have to be on top of your shit.
Yes.
I mean, it definitely helps if the people you work for know what they're doing, but you have to be responsible for yourself.
But he literally kind of said that in an era where guys weren't necessarily saying that. He was just like, I mean, you have to be the person that's taking charge, because you see when McCarthy leaves, everything falls apart.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I bet that fell heavy on him, where he was just like, oh, I probably could have had a couple more years if I just kept my shit together.
Right.
But
like, just fight through it playing for Hornsby, because the team made the World Series in 32 the year after he left.
Yep.
So the week after that interview, though, he ends up falling in his apartment and dying. The saddest part was nobody claimed his body.
No,
for 3 days.
his son was not. They weren't on a good relationship, and then he had like a very sparse attended funeral, and then like 9 months later, they had a bunch of baseball people do like a good memorial for him.
Yeah.
But the way he died and his original funeral kind of highlights how bad it got at the end.
It was terrible. The NL had to send money. His drinking buddies had to pull money together just to get him properly buried.
Yes.
Which, to go from like the highest of highs,
Yeah.
like just a baseball star in Chicago. I mean, other than New York, where else at that time was it better to be a baseball star?
Yeah.
Ends up being buried in Martinsburg, eventually making his way back there. And despite all of his issues and his limited window of productivity, he eventually, and rightfully so, made the Hall of Fame.
I think 100% rightfully so.
Yeah.
You're looking at one of the best power hitters of his era. He was in that era compared to Ruth a ton.
Yeah. Have you ever seen him like stand by side, not only Ruth, but like other players?
Yeah.
Holy shit. It's
good.
It's comical, and then you're like, oh, he can't help. Like, oh God.
Yes,
Look.
that's the way God did not make him. That was his parents with their alcoholism. God damn.
He 244 career dingers, an MVP, led the league in RBIs twice, homers 3 times, major leagues once as well for home runs, and that 191, man.
That forever. That's going to be.
And he's lost to history almost, because whenever guys, like cross 100 RBI threshold early, they're like, oh, he's on pace to be. The only time you hear about him is in the context of that, not, oh, he was the best player in the National League.
In 1930, he was without a doubt the best, and a couple of years before probably.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
With his consistent 300. I mean, he hit 150 RBIs you know what I mean? 156 or whatever. So he was really one of the best hitters probably ever, especially in the dead ball era.
Yeah, well, he's coming out after the dead. It ends.
I was going to say, it like the curveball starts to come in, like 30 or whatever it was?
Well, yeah, there's no more spitball. The laces are tightly wound.
Yep.
Produce offense. So he came in at the perfect time.
Well, I think they did the laces and everything in that MVP season.
Oh, yeah.
Which then makes you're just like, oh, he was that good.
Yeah. What could he have done with 4 or 5 more years?
Yep.
Maybe we don't have a curse for the Cubs.
No shit. You're
Seriously,
not even wrong. Yeah.
Like, or at least they maybe make it to a couple more World Series.
Yeah.
But anyway,
right.
Hack Wilson, everybody.
Look at these shirts.